The light came on at exactly 3:17 a.m., not a flicker, not lightning, a warm yellow porch light glowing across the lake. I sat upright so fast that the sleeping bag twisted around my legs. For several seconds I just stared through the cabin window. There it was. A small wooden cabin sitting on the opposite shore. Its windows glowed softly against the darkness. Someone walked past one of them, a human silhouette, slow, calm, like they had no idea anyone was watching. The problem was, that cabin shouldn't have existed. There was no road on that side of the lake. No trail, no bridge, no dock, nothing. Then the porch door slowly opened, the figure stepped outside and looked directly toward our cabin. This is Tales of the Dark. A subscriber recently shared this experience after a reunion trip with 4 college friends. The location and names have been changed, but they insisted every detail happened exactly as they remember it. 5 of us rented a lakeside cabin for one weekend. It had been almost 6 years since we'd all been together. There was me, Ryan, Chris, Evan, and Tyler. We wanted somewhere quiet, no tourists, no cell service, no distractions, just fishing, hiking, and catching up. Ryan found the cabin online. The listing had almost no reviews, only 4. Every review gave it 5 stars. Every review mentioned how peaceful the lake was. The owner lived in another town and left the key inside a lockbox. Simple check-in, no neighbors, exactly what we wanted. The drive took nearly 5 hours. The last 40 minutes were nothing but winding gravel roads through dense pine forest. Eventually, the GPS stopped updating. A wooden sign finally appeared beside the road. BLACKWATR Lake Population, blank. The final mile followed the shoreline until we reached our rental cabin. It was perfect. Old but well maintained. Large wooden deck facing the lake. Stone fireplace, private dock, a canoe tied to the pier. The nearest visible cabin was nowhere in sight. The owner had left a handwritten note on the kitchen table. "Welcome, please avoid the lake after dark. Fog becomes dangerous." Chris laughed. "That's definitely not creepy." Ryan folded the note and tossed it aside, probably just liability stuff. The first afternoon was exactly what we'd hoped for. We unpacked, cooked burgers outside, played cards, told stories from college. The lake remained perfectly still. No boats, no fishermen. No jet skis, nothing. It felt like we had rented the entire mountain valley. Around sunset, I wandered down to the dock with my camera. The opposite shoreline sat nearly half a mile away. Steep cliffs, dense forest, no buildings, no smoke, no signs of people. I even zoomed in with my DSLR. Nothing, just trees. That night we stayed up drinking around the fire pit. By midnight, everyone had gone inside except me. The stars reflected across the water so perfectly that the lake looked almost invisible. The silence felt unnatural. Not a single insect, no frogs, no birds, just complete stillness. Eventually I went to bed. Then, at exactly 3:17, I saw the light, the cabin across the lake. I didn't wake anyone. Instead, I grabbed my camera. Through the zoom lens, I could see it clearly. Dark green walls, stone chimney, small wooden porch, one rocking chair, a lantern hanging beside the front door. Someone stood behind the front window, watching. I took several photographs. The figure never moved after almost 5 minutes. The porch light switched off. Everything disappeared into darkness. The next morning, I walked straight back to the dock. The opposite shore looked exactly as it had before. Nothing, no cabin, no chimney, no clearing, only untouched forest climbing the hillside. Ryan joined me carrying 2 coffees. "What are you looking at? There was a cabin over there." He laughed. "No, there wasn't. I saw it. You were dreaming." I showed him the photographs. His smile disappeared. The cabin was clearly visible. "So," he whispered, "let's go find it." We spent most of the morning hiking around the shoreline looking for another access road. There wasn't one, according to the map. The opposite side of the lake was protected land. No buildings had ever been registered there. Chris even downloaded older satellite images, still nothing. "Just forest," Tyler shrugged. "Maybe it's farther down the lake than you thought." It wasn't. I knew exactly where I'd seen it. That evening, curiosity replaced fear. We set up 2 cameras on tripods facing the opposite shore. Ryan placed a GoPro at the end of the dock. Chris programmed his DSLR to capture 1 photograph every 30 seconds throughout the night. If anything lights up, he said, we'll catch it. The rest of us agreed to stay awake. Nothing happened for hours. The lake remained dark, silent. Then, 3:17. The porch light came on. Every one of us saw it. Nobody spoke. The cabin stood exactly where I described. Tyler slowly raised his binoculars. There are lights inside. Ryan picked up the DSLR. Someone's walking around. Chris zoomed in on the front porch. A man stepped outside. Middle-aged, dark jacket, hands in his pockets, he stared across the water toward us. Ryan raised one hand and waved for several seconds. Nothing happened. Then, the man waved back. Tyler smiled nervously. See, just another cabin, but Chris didn't smile. He lowered the camera. Did you notice something? What? He copied Ryan. So, he waited. We all looked at him. What do you mean? Chris replayed the video. Ryan lifted his hand, almost 2 seconds later. The man across the lake copied the exact movement, not at the same time, after, like he had watched Ryan first. Nobody spoke after that. The porch light turned off. The cabin vanished into darkness once again. The following morning, the opposite shore was empty, no cabin. No clearing, no porch, nothing. Ryan refused to believe it. He climbed onto the dock with binoculars. He searched every inch of the shoreline. There has to be something. There wasn't, not even a broken foundation, just trees. Then Tyler noticed something floating near the dock. It was one of our cameras, the GoPro we'd left recording overnight. It had somehow detached from its mount. The waterproof case was cracked. The memory card was still inside. We hurried back to the cabin and loaded the footage. The recording ran normally until exactly 3:16. Then the image filled with static for almost 40 seconds. When the picture returned, the camera was no longer facing the lake. Someone had turned it around. It now pointed directly at our cabin. 5 figures stood on the deck, us watching the lake. Then, another person slowly walked into frame from the woods behind our cabin. None of us reacted. None of us turned around. The figure stopped just a few feet behind Tyler, watching us. The video ended. Chris looked at us one by one. Tell me one of you remembers somebody standing behind us. No one answered because there had only been 5 of us, or at least, that's what we thought. The room fell completely silent. Nobody moved, nobody even breathed. We replayed the footage, again and again. Every time, the same thing happened. 5 of us stood on the deck facing the lake. Then someone walked out of the trees behind us. A man, tall, wearing a dark jacket, hands in his pockets. He stopped only a few feet behind Tyler. He stayed there for almost 20 seconds. None of us turned around, none of us reacted. Eventually, he simply walked out of frame. Ryan looked at me. Was that edited? Chris shook his head. The camera never stopped recording. Tyler forced a laugh. Maybe someone was camping. No, I answered. If someone had walked that close to us, one of us would have heard something. Nobody disagreed. The rest of the day felt different. The excitement was gone. We couldn't stop looking over our shoulders. Even while eating lunch on the deck, every few minutes someone glanced toward the tree line. The forest suddenly felt much closer than it had yesterday. That afternoon, we decided to solve the mystery once and for all, if there really was another cabin. We were going to reach it. The only problem, there wasn't a single boat except the old canoe tied to our dock. Ryan checked it carefully. No leaks, still usable. I'll go. I'll come. Chris immediately volunteered. I wasn't comfortable splitting up, but Ryan insisted only 2 people should cross while the rest of us stayed behind with binoculars and radios. If anything happens, I'll be watching. 30 minutes later, the canoe pushed away from the dock. The lake remained perfectly calm, almost unnaturally calm. No waves, no wind, nothing. The crossing should have taken 15 minutes. Halfway across, Chris spoke through the walkie-talkie. We are almost there. I raised my binoculars. They looked tiny against the endless water. Then something strange happened. The fog appeared, not from the shoreline, from the middle of the lake. Within seconds, The canoe disappeared completely, the radio crackled. We can't see, static. Where? More static, then silence. Ryan called repeatedly, no answer. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15, nothing. Then Tyler pointed toward the water. The canoe. It emerged from the fog, drifting slowly back toward us. Empty. Chris jumped into the lake before it reached the dock. Ryan climbed out immediately afterward. Both were soaked. Both looked terrified. What happened? Ryan couldn't answer. Chris finally spoke. We reached the other side, and there wasn't anything there. What do you mean? No cabin, no clearing, no porch. We stepped onto the shore. It was just forest. Ryan interrupted him, but... He stopped talking. But what? I kept hearing footsteps behind us. I thought Chris was following me. Chris slowly looked at him. I thought they were yours. Neither of them spoke after that night. None of us wanted to stay. We packed most of our equipment into the SUV. The only problem, the gravel road we'd driven in on, was underwater, not flooded, gone. The lake now stretched across it. Tyler frowned. That's impossible. We had driven over that road yesterday. Now, there was only water. Ryan checked the GPS. The map still showed a road right where the lake was. Nothing made sense anymore, with no way out. We had no choice but to spend one final night. Nobody slept. Around midnight, we heard the first knock. 3 slow taps on the front door. Ryan grabbed the flashlight, opened it immediately. Nobody. The porch was empty. The wood stood perfectly still. He closed the door. 5 minutes later, 3 more knocks, this time on one of the bedroom windows. Chris pulled the curtain aside. Nothing, only darkness. Then Tyler whispered, "Look, across the lake." The cabin had returned, only this time. Every window was lit, not one, all of them. We counted. 5 windows, 5 silhouettes, each standing perfectly still, watching us. Nobody spoke. Ryan slowly lifted his flashlight. The figure in the center copied him, not immediately. 2 seconds later, then every other figure copied the movement, one after another, like mirrors learning too slowly. Chris lowered the flashlight. So they're copying us. I kept staring through the binoculars. No. What? They're copying? Tomorrow. Everyone looked at me. What? I pointed toward the cabin. The man by the window. He scratched his neck. Nobody understood. Exactly 2 seconds later, Tyler scratched his own neck, completely unconsciously. Chris laughed nervously. Coincidence. Then the figure leaned against the porch railing. 2 seconds later, Ryan shifted into the exact same position. My heart dropped. They're not following us. They're moving first. Nobody said another word. We stood frozen, watching ourselves, without realizing it. The porch light suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the cabin. Then every flashlight in our cabin died. Complete blackness. Someone whispered, "They're here." Footsteps circled outside, slow, deliberate. Wood creaked beneath the porch. Another step. Closer. The footsteps stopped outside the front door. Nobody breathed. Then the doorknob slowly turned. Once, twice, it stopped. A voice came through the wood, soft, almost identical to Ryan's. "Open up." Ryan stared at the door. "I didn't say that." The voice came again. This time, using my voice, "We know you're awake." Then Chris's, then Tyler's, then Evan's. It repeated every one of us, perfectly, only slightly delayed. The voice finally laughed, not loudly, quietly, like someone practicing. The footsteps moved away. None of us slept until sunrise. The moment daylight returned, the lake looked normal again. The road had reappeared. The opposite shore contained nothing but trees, no cabin, no dock, nothing. We loaded the SUV without speaking. Nobody wanted one last photograph. Nobody wanted breakfast. We simply left, halfway down the mountain road. Tyler suddenly asked, "Did anyone bring the guest book?" We all looked at each other. What guest book? The one inside the cabin. There hadn't been a guest book, at least. None of us remembered seeing one. Tyler insisted he had read it before bed. He claimed the final entry had been written nearly 30 years earlier. It said only one sentence: "If you see the cabin, don't let them learn your face." None of us believed him until 3 weeks later. Chris finished editing all the footage. He called me immediately. "You need to come over." The timeline contained every clip from the trip, except there was one clip none of us remembered recording. It lasted only 11 seconds. The camera faced the lake at sunrise. The opposite shore was empty, then, for a single frame, the cabin appeared crystal clear, not across the lake on our side, exactly where our rental cabin stood. Then it vanished again. Chris paused the frame, zoomed in. 5 people stood on the porch. They weren't watching the lake, they were watching us. I recognized every face. Mine, Ryan's, Chris's, Tyler's, and the 5th looked exactly like me, except he smiled. I never had. Chris checked the metadata. The timestamp wasn't from that weekend, it was dated August 14, 1998, 27 years before we visited the lake. We never told anyone exactly where Blackwater Lake was. A month later, I tried finding the rental listing again. It had disappeared. The owner's phone number no longer existed. County records showed no cabin had ever been built on that property, according to the land registry. The shoreline had been untouched forest for over 60 years. Sometimes I still wake up at exactly 3:17 in the morning. When I look out my bedroom window, I don't see houses or streets. I see a quiet lake, a small wooden cabin across the water. Its porch light glowing softly, 5 figures standing outside, waiting. One of them always raises a hand. He never waves first, he waits for me to do it. If you are brave enough to hear more nightmares, subscribe to Tales of the Dark. And if you have your own terrifying experience, leave it in the comments or send your story by email. Maybe your nightmare will become the next story told here.